of the rain. Thank you very much for hosting. I haven't planned out very much. I just wanted to say a few short things, and then I will hand it over. But the idea here was originally going to be an event about one book, and then it became an event about 2 books. So many books, a pile of books. So the idea was to have a discussion around 2 different books. The one is this book by Negri and Guattari, New Lines, Alliance, New Pieces of Liberty, and the second one is this great newish sort of guidebook about how to occupy your university and make a pad thai in the process. Maybe not the pad thai, but something like cooking of something. So okay, so I want to say a few basic things. Actually, I'll mainly introduce this book because originally there's going to be several other people who are supposed to be here. Matteo Mandarini, who wrote the introduction, and Ariana Beauvais, who did some of the translation for the new edition. So a few quick things. This book was originally published under the title "Communists Like Us." It was written back in the 80s, and when it was translated into English, Silvera Lochenze had this great idea that if it was called "Communists Like Us," it would remind people of I don't know if anyone remembers Black Like Me, but that was his reference point. It actually reminds me more of this film with Sorry. That had a reminded me more of this 80s film with Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd, Spies Like Us, which may or may not be a cinematic masterpiece depending on who you ask.
There's a film called Thieves Like Us.
Oh, so there was a whole lot of references going on. Okay, but this is actually perhaps my favorite book by Negri, and there's a few strange reasons for it. Okay. Let's say if we sort of reduce the whole history of Italian autonomous workerism into 2 main ideas. I think this frames it very well, and it frames it in a way that sort of makes quite clear why the education struggles in Croatia are also very interesting. So let's say the history of Italian autonomous workerism can be framed around 2 ideas. One is the idea of sort of the primacy of refusal. So rather than looking to sort of capital and the state for how they shape history and how things happen, what you should look at are moments of revolts and refusal and resistance, and how these moments transform history, politics, capital. So sort of primacy of sort of resistance and refusal as a sort of core element. A second, me perhaps more important idea is the idea of class composition, which is looking at sort of how any situation is shaped by how these forms of revolt or resistance or refusal influence the field of politics, how they sort of, let's say, shape the horizon of the possible. And so looking at how, let's say, the attempt to escape wage work in the factory leads to decentralized, distributed post-forward production, or how the rise of, let's say, feminist politics leads to a focus on sort of kind of liberal feminism. So the conditions of politics one exists in are always being shaped by how these revolts and refusals are sort of rendered into forms that are, let's say, productive for capital, productive for the state. So what's quite interesting about this book is this book is written in mainly in 82, 83. So it's a moment where a certain kinds of autonomous politics that had become quite prevalent in the 60s and in the 70s had actually been quite dramatically defeated. Thousands of people were in jail, people were living in exile, like Negri found himself in Paris. There was a moment of sort of falling apart. So what makes this book interesting is rather than saying let's sort of mourn, and focus on class composition says, how can we find out, search for, let's say, new forms that political action will take? So sort of Negri working with Guattari, what they're doing here is they're sort of trying to move past the party form, move past the sort of centralized form, and say, well, what would a politics, people didn't talk about networks yet, but what they're talking about is sort of a networked, open, rhizomatic form of politics. And it's trying to find sort of new possibilities within how previous revolts have been, let's say, rendered less useful or sort of neutralized. So that's why I find really useful about it. It sort of is trying to find a way to sort of not sort of mourn that, let's say, the politics coming out of '68 or the sort of the revolts of the '70s are past, but we're going to say, okay, fine, that happened. What can we do about it? Where can we go from here? So that's why I think this is really an interesting book, and it's trying to sort of working between, let's say, a French philosophical tradition, a political tradition that's looking at the production of desire, how we come into subjectivity, and trying to merge it with this sort of autonomous focus on an expanded notion of sort of class, and sort of look at these emerging kinds of new politics. And so it's kind of interesting to revisit it now, when you might say that if in the early '80s they're looking to network politics as something new, you might say that we've actually come to a certain, let's say, waning of the network as being the most productive, innovative thing. Like, just because everyone is on Facebook doesn't mean it's going to cause some sort of newish revolt. We could perhaps get a discussion about looking at both ways that sort of network social media have been sort of embedded within revolts, but also are used to sort of shape, control, and sort of hold back forms of radical politics. So there's more to say about it, but that's what I want to say basically about this book. Sort of this sort of merging together of two different political traditions and trying to find a sort of new way forward. In a way, I think that's what really connects it very well to the Occupation Cookbook, and I won't say very much about it since there are people here who are far more skilled and aware of sort of, you can tell your own story better than I can. But if Croatia, Croatian politics is a situation where there was a certain kind of, let's say, how would you describe this? How do you find a sort of new radical politics in a situation that in some ways feel quite compromised? And so sort of this sort of university occupation movement as a way to sort of find a new radical politics coming out of this situation. That's what I find inspiring about it, is sort of not just sort of here this thing happened, it was great, but sort of providing a sort of guidebook saying here's what you can learn from these new possibilities and how you can sort of use them elsewhere. I won't say much more about that because you can say much more about it. But should I turn it over to you then, or?
Yeah, okay. So I will try to introduce the other book, the second book, called the Occupation Cookbook. I'll just to give like some general overview. This is a book actually describing how the university occupation was done in Croatia, in Croatia's capital Zagreb, in 2009. In 2009, what happened? There were two big waves of student occupations. First in spring and then in autumn. The first one was like it occurred in some 20 faculties and universities all around Croatia in 8 cities, and it lasted 35 days. And the second one was a little bit smaller, but still pretty big. And this occupation cookbook tries to describe how our occupation and the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences in Zagreb actually looked like. When I say faculty, it means It's an institution, it's a whole building, a large building of like 7,000 students. So it's in Croatia. When we did our occupations, it was, the whole building was closed. There was no regular classes, so it was not done like in I don't know, in Germany or in Austria where they block just the one major classroom. It was done, so the whole building was closed for its regular activities. Our demand was, there was just one demand. It was free and accessible education for all, because in Croatia now there are like 60% of students that are paying for their education, so they have tuition fees, and students demanded the return to the previous system which we had in socialist Yugoslavia. That was just free education, so no tuition fees whatsoever. That is the abolition of all means of paying in the educational system. So, what is so unusual about this case? Of course, in our occupation, like in most occupations around the world, and not only in university occupations, but also whenever there is a sort of massive grassroots organization or rebellion or something like that, there is, of course, the people need mode of organization, and usually it is a direct democratic mode. That is, everybody gathers in a place and then they vote, and it's sort of a way to produce some kind of self-legitimation for the action. So this is normal in all kind of progressive action, grassroots action. So it's not, this is what we have seen in Soviets in 1905 and 1917 in Russia and Spanish Civil War, etc. So, and in all the university occupations, more or less. So this is not anything exceptional, of course, and it is a well-known phenomenon. But what is different in this case is that we try to develop our model of direct democracy to sort of institutionalize it, just to because there are, of course, if you have these models of direct democratic decision making, sometimes it can be there are many problems, like, I don't know, the general assemblies can last for 10 hours and stuff like that. So, and there are, of course, always the people who are opposing everything. It is not efficient. You cannot really decide anything like that. It's not practical, stuff like that. So what we try to do is to make some basic rules that grew out of practice. So it was not done like beforehand, but these are some rules that came up spontaneously from practice, and just to write them down. And so it could be of some, perhaps it could be of some help to other students trying to organize themselves when they're doing university occupations, and not just students, but also perhaps workers, other kinds of direct democratic organizations, activists, or whatever. The reason we did that is because when the students in Croatia prepared their occupation, of course we knew that this is the method of the usual method of decision making, but it was very difficult, almost impossible to find how it is actually done. Of course, there's some kind of general assembly, but how do you vote? How do you actually make decisions? This was completely blurred because it's very difficult to find the details. And even if you look, for instance, if you want to see how Soviets in 1917 Russia functioned, or I don't know, Spanish Civil War, or during Paris Commune, it is very difficult to find the real details. Or is in case of Soviet Russia, you can find how it was supposed to function, but it's really difficult to find out the real details. That is how it functioned in reality. So with this book we tried to present our model, so our model that was produced out of practice, and so it might be of some help to future activists. And our model is basically all decisions were made in the General Assembly, which is in Croatia, which we called plenum, that is some kind of plenary assembly. And the funny thing is that in Croatia this was like spring of 2009, and there was also massive wave of occupations in fall in Germany and Austria, and the funny thing is that they also called their general assemblies plenum, that is plenum in German, plenum in Croatian, and they had some kind of similar organizations also with plenums and working groups, and in the same term. And I still don't understand. Is it just a coincidence? Because it was not this word in Croatia. It was some kind of
good Latin word.
Yeah, it's a good Latin word, but it was not. It existed before, but it was not used in this sense. So and also in German. So I'm not sure if it's somehow connected or copied, but it's very strange. At least it's a strange coincidence. So aside from plenum, the General Assembly, there all major decisions were made. Thus, if we are going to go further with our occupation, all suggestions, demands were dealt with there, and with just everybody who was there could vote. And it was not only students of the faculty could vote, but also anybody who got there, like ordinary citizen that was there, they could also vote. And the difference is from, I can compare it for instance with the situation in Austria, because I was there. They had a lot of problems in Vienna with voting, because basically they had like 1,000 people at the plenum, like we had also such large plenums, but they didn't want, if there was one person against something, then it could not be voted for. So I mean, it is completely crazy. But the way we did it in Croatia is that you have to have the majority. Of course, the tendency was to have some kind of consensus that, I don't know, like 70, 80 or 90% of people disagree. So we talk until all more or less agree. But if something is very controversial, then you just count the numbers, you just count the votes, and the majority wins. With our stance was that this was efficient, and that of course it makes no sense if just one or few persons are against something. Then this is not really a way in which you can do things. So this was, for instance, one of the things we wanted to describe, just to describe our model, because as I said, it is very difficult to find this sort of details anywhere in the books or on the internet, etc. And there was also the other thing. There was working groups. That is decisions that had to be like there was no decision making on the working groups, but on the working groups people discussed it. They were also completely open, so anybody could come there as well, but usually smaller number of people went there. This is like 5 to, I don't know, 40 or something like that, and they discussed some special issues that couldn't be tackled at the plenum itself at the beginning, but they made some propositions, and then they were discussed later in the plenum and voted. voted on. And also one other thing that we wanted to do is one of the things we wanted to explain is also this is what I heard from student activists all over the world. For instance, there is a problem of how to this problem of legitimization of general assemblies. That is, how can you, for instance, vote the first time for the occupation of university, or I don't know, it can be also for strike in for making a strike in effect or something like that. If, for instance, not everybody who is part of that institution got to vote, so it is kind of a theoretical opposition to this kind of decision making. But we wanted to show that this is well, this is just not really an argument, because the situation which we are fighting against, that is the situation with student representatives that are voted for only once in every 3 years, and there's not a lot of people, at least in Croatia, really votes on these elections, and they don't have to listen to the student base, and nobody actually knows what they're doing. That it is actually much more non-democratic than any sort of general assembly might be. So that these kinds of things that are put against general assemblies are not or direct democracy in general are not really valid. And well, I think this is basically it. So maybe we can discuss, if there are some questions, we can discuss some further issues. But I think this is it for beginning.
Can you say a bit more about working groups? Technicalities, minute
Yeah.
taking,
Yeah.
governance. Just brief.
So the important thing we learned is that very basic, mundane sort of things can be very important. For instance, it is because when you have direct democracy, it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be chaos, as some people, enemies of direct democracy claim usually. So it should be very organized. For instance, if you want to have a general assembly that is not chaotic, that is not going to last for like 10 hours, which is of course completely non-practical, is what you have to have is what we call a working group for technical issues of the General Assembly. That is, prior to the General Assembly, you should have this working group that is also open, so anybody can come. Of course, usually it's not like the General Assembly can have like 1,000 people, but there's I don't know, from 5 to I don't know, maybe 30 people, depending on what the situation is. But they should plan some sort of provisionary daily agenda, and then on the plenum you present that to all the people who are there, and then they can vote and add something, and so on. So this is very important, because you have to have, this has to be organized. And also so it is very important is the minutes. So you have to have the minutes of the General Assembly. That is, you have to what we did is we had one person that wrote down everything that happened on the plenum, and it was projected on the wall. So they wrote on a computer and it's projected on the wall, so everybody could see at all time what this sort of secretary of the plenum was writing down, and it could be seen that it is not made up or something. And anybody who couldn't, for instance, come to the General Assembly, who just wanted, who just wanted to see what was happened, it can be seen later online. So this is also very important. And also what we did is that we've seen that we also had very large general assemblies, like from 1,000 people, and microphones were very important because of course it's a very large classroom, so it is, if you have more hundreds of people, it's impossible to speak without a microphone. But also the microphone was some sort of facilitator in the way that people usually didn't speak without it, so they were waiting for their turn. Everybody could just raise their hand and ask for their turn to speak, but there was, well, in this way, because of the mics, all this shouting and chaos was in some way prevented, and we had two facilitators. I mean, we have it now because the general assemblies are still going on regularly in our faculty, that were also changed every time. And in this way we wanted to avoid any possibility of creating leaders, because we thought it was not really pragmatical. We also had spokespersons, but they were also different all the time. So we had 3 different spokespersons every time, because also in this way we wanted to put our political demand for free education in the first place, and not to make no sort of leaders so that the media cannot really point their attention to irrelevant things, because they're always looking for spectacles, new young politicians, blah blah. So we wanted to avoid that.
Was the occupation successful in achieving your demands? I mean, did you actually get free education?
No, we didn't get free education, but it was, so the main demand was not achieved, but of course we were aware that this is really difficult. I mean, didn't really expect it, but it had a lot of success, because right now, well, the situation is changing all the time, so it's not clear what it will be next year, because they're only doing some reforms and we are fighting all the time. But now 3 or 5 years are free, so this was not like that before. If there was no occupation, all 5 years would pay. So it is on this very material level a lot of there was some success, but also if you look at the student movement, it really got activated, and now it's so the student movement prior to 2008, it was practically non-existent, and they're always in the media, always said, oh, the students, they will never do anything, and now they're really a sort of political force in Croatia, and they're always even in the media and the politicians, that they're really well, the students are always present, they're always there, so it's not something that you can just discharge. And there was a major shift in public discourse on a general level, because it seems that the whole discourse shifted a little bit to the left. Because the interesting thing is that now free education is at least nominally something that everybody has to support, even the politicians, at least nominally, because it's something like now in Croatia. Prior to 2008, it was non-existent. Nobody ever spoke of it. But now it's like, if you're not for free education, it's like you're against justice. So everybody has to be for it, and even the Ministry of Education and Science, that is now trying to impose 3 new neoliberal laws. They have to claim, of course, falsely in public, that they are actually free education laws, because in that way they are trying to get public support. And also the important thing was also that this sort of the way the student did the critique of the commodification and commercialization in higher education was like, it was not isolated to just, of course, to just higher education, but it was contextualized in the whole context of general economy of politics, and the neoliberal system was really openly criticized, and this was the first time in Croatia that it was done. And so now what happened was that also so prior to 2009 nobody ever spoke of neoliberalism with this term in Croatia. It was very, very, very rare in public discourse, or practically non-existent. But now it's normal, and also even by mainstream politicians, it's very difficult to say I'm a neoliberal now, because neoliberalism has sort of very negative connotation. So even if you are a neoliberal, you shouldn't really say it out loud, because it sounds really bad, like saying something like I'm the devil if you say I'm a neoliberal. So this was also very important, and for instance, a lot of let's say not really mainstream, but a little bit sort of alternative, but still popular left liberal journalists have also, for instance, become more radical, and some of the newspapers and magazines have also, because of this sort of critique that grew out of this student occupation that is still present now in Croatia, it has also radicalized a lot of these journalists and magazines, and so this was also important.
And how did it become a part of the socially legitimized? How was that process? Like, what were your strategies of dissemination, and also what happened with the media? How was civil society involved?
Well, the thing is that what you see in, for instance, in the United States, if there is a university occupation, usually it is not really in the media, and it is not such a big thing. But in Croatia is a small country, so the occupations were like major news. It was the first news it was the first thing in
Headlines.
It was in the headlines, yeah, and it was all the time in the media. So it was really big. It was really big. It was one of the one of the largest political actions in the whole year, and it really made. It was really important. So I don't know if one can get a false idea if you compare it to some other countries. To some other countries, this was really much more a big of deal in Croatia, and so a lot of the ideas were disseminated through the media, and we also have a web portal called Free Faculty of Philosophy that is also very popular, and there are some original texts are being published, and also a lot of translations and stuff like that. So it was also a way to promote our ideas.
But how do you think it became socially relevant? Like, I'll give you an example. For example, was it accompanied by public protest? What part of like civil society do you think felt called on by the movement? I can give you like a counterexample. Just in Chile, for example, in 2006 there was a big student movement that somehow became like very, very visible out of nothing. Like there were no political scientists who even thought about education becoming part of the agenda, and then suddenly it was the high school kids that went into the streets.
Where?
And in Chile, in Santiago,
okay.
and it actually was like, it created educational reform, blah, blah, blah. But at that moment, it was really relevant because it was very transversal politically. Like it wasn't like right or left that were supporting the kids, but it was really like a generation thing. Like many adults and what people that are like in working age supported the movement very strongly because they felt it was like their kids doing something for themselves. And then it became like, and it was supported, of course, by left-wing political parties, but the kids never allowed it to become politicized. Like they never had any relation. They didn't let the parties in. I mean, like more on that, like small.
Yeah, yeah.
level.
So
And the public protests of the kids spilling into the streets was what called the media's attention.
So
And
what called media attention was the occupations themselves, because well, there were also some protests, and we had actions outside the universities, for instance, in the center of the city, and there are also all kinds of these smaller actions. But what really got their attention was these occupations, because for previous almost 40 years there was no such thing in Croatia. So this was really a major thing, and also. What the students did was they were also, it was made clear that they're not connected with any of the parties that exist in Croatia, because of course we have right wing and the so-called left wing that is not really left wing or social democratic party, and this is also a major change because there was no sort of this non-partisan opposition, and especially no sort of this completely anti-systemic opposition. And as I said before, now the students, that is the student movement, they're really perceived as some sort of political force that has to be counted with, because, for instance, in March of 2011, this year, we had also a wave of big protests in Croatia. For instance, in Croatia's capital there was a few protests with 10,000 people, and also students joined these protests, and many people are saying, oh, finally there are students from the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, they're finally there, they will articulate the protests. And so it was really, they were perceived as some kind of force that can bring change here. So, and they really played a big role in these protests. So, whenever there is some sort of protest or strike, or I don't know, farmers are protesting, or there is some sort of occupation of factory by workers, the students are always there. So. This is something that grew out of this, looking this picture, the whole picture, not just the higher education system. So what the student movement, or well, it's not really just the student movement, because there are also teachers there, and there are also people that are not really students and not from the same faculty. So this sort of movement is involved with whole spectrum of things, not just higher education anymore. And for instance, what we saw this year in Croatia is that teachers actually joined the fight against neoliberalization of higher education and science. And what they did is they actually learned from their students. So they took over. They not only joined the fight against commercialization of education that the students have been doing for like 3 years now, but they also took their method. So we have an official direct democratic union called Academic Solidarity in Croatia now, and it's the first official direct democratic union in Croatia. So and also now it's a very big deal in the media. It gets a lot of media attention, and we are preparing for a strike right now. So it is also something that could not have been done if there was no student actions prior to that. And it seems that we will be able to stop these 3 new neoliberal laws that they are trying to impose. And the funny thing is that now we even have a Croatian Academy of Sciences and Arts that is usually very conservative. Even they are now speaking openly against privatization of education in science and against commercialization. It was completely non-thinkable, like unimaginable just a couple of years ago. So by having this radical student movement and radical direct democratic union of teachers, somehow also the whole academic community went a little bit to the left. So this is also one of the achievements. So actually these a lot of things has changed because of these occupations, and of course it could not been, we couldn't imagine that this is going to happen, but it was really a big change.
Well, these struggles seem to be happening all around the world, and yet the demand, I mean, it's very easy to see that, you know, we're all against neoliberalism, against privatization, but does that mean we're for a return to the welfare state or the communist state, or did some alternative come up in discussions to that kind of existing model? So who's to pay for the free education, and is it going to stay within the context of state funding?
Well, what the students and the teachers and the academic community did is that what we say regularly, for instance, in the media, is that, well, we know what certain money goes to other things which are not really so useful, like to, I don't know, to fight war in Afghanistan or for the church or for corruption, and we say that this is much smaller of a figure, yeah, and so we're just saying we will not. This is not up for discussion. We just want free education, and we won't discuss it. We just don't accept. We don't accept answers like there is no money, because we know that there is money. Of course, when they need the money for I don't know, making incentives for the capitals, there is always money on. But when it's for education or healthcare system, there is no money. I mean, it's the same practically everywhere around the world. But what we are trying to do in Croatia now is to promote the idea of direct democracy, not just on this micro level, on the level of universities, because right now, for instance, on our faculty of humanities and social sciences, actually this General Assembly, the plenum, has taken over the responsibilities of former student representative body. So now all decisions that have to do with the students are made on the General Assembly. But what we are trying to do, and this was done, for instance, during these 2011 March wave of protests, was that the demands for direct democracy was made on a national level. So what was demanded was not just direct democracy on this micro level, but also national, which means we want more referendums, and in this way we want to be able to influence the politics more.
But isn't that still quite conservative or even reactionary, especially in East European context? Like, is it going back to state communism, or does it aspire to become international? What would that mean economically?
No, of course it's not. I don't see how direct democracy can be reactionary. But
Well, in the sense of the idea of the money coming from taxation, right? I mean, where is the money going to come from? So that's basically kind of state socialism, welfare state model. So that's quite, in terms of the possibilities within the thinking of
states
the left.
are, we have the states right now, so we cannot really dismantle them. I mean, it's not something which we can do on a short term.
No, but it's something that capitalism does incredibly well, dismantle states. There are transnational corporations that work on a global level, and yet politically the left is still kind of stuck on this problem of the state. And I think what we really need is a kind of international model, at least an ideal to strive
Yeah, but
for.
how would you ask for free education on an international level?
Well, that's my question to you, because I think otherwise we're just being a bit nostalgic for the welfare state and not thinking about the kind of exclusions that model produced on a global scale.
No, it's no.
Masha,
Just,
let me do this one. Because I've lived here 15 years and I've been involved last year and a half in working groups with them in Zagreb. And it was first, after 2009 protest, friends came back to London talking about how interesting it was, and we were in touch and they started coming to London more regularly. And it's the experience of the state, you know, here, the classic, especially Trotskyist interpretation of East Europe is completely bonkers from our perspective who live there, because it says it's state capitalism. That's the classic interpretation. It's true in a sense that it was in many ways copy of the Western development factories, you know, from Lenin onwards, and Stalin also, you know, just copy factories, and the role of money was not changed. It was still money. It still had its universal problems. What it delivered, and especially with self-management in Yugoslavia, was something that's not, it doesn't exist in a Western perception of state socialism. So being a special case, for us, the state is not problematic. It's not problematic on several levels. One, because we had self-management. Two, because we've seen it deliver the quality of life that far surpassed anything that the satellite state under Soviet regime saw in the rest of the Eastern Bloc, because we were not part of the bloc. And also because we saw the market advantage, which is also unusual for the states, because we had a non-alignment movement, hundreds of millions of I mean, the Middle East was built by Yugoslavian companies. People don't know this. So it's very, very difficult to explain here why it is not problematic at all. We don't see it as welfare state. You know, welfare word almost has no direct translation in Croatian. I wouldn't use it at all. There's no, I mean, what welfare? I mean, state is there to provide free education. That's not welfare, that's state.
But what do you do with immigration? I mean, I have no problem with the state. It's not like I have some antipathy to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
state from
yeah,
an
yeah.
anarchist perspective.
Yeah.
But does that mean in order for that state to function, you need to have poverty in other areas of the world, or boundaries where people aren't allowed to travel freely? Because that's what makes global capitalism so attractive, is it does promise that mobility. Of course it doesn't deliver.
yeah, but Croatia, you know, Croatia is some kind of semi-periphery. We don't really have sort of immigration like you have in Britain, or so it's a completely, it's not the core of the capitalist system. So our position is much more different, and what we actually see is that well, a lot of problems in Croatia are connected to Croatia's accession to the EU, which is supposed to be soon, because what we see as problematic, of course, except for the EU being a neoliberal organization and being directly responsible for a lot of neoliberal reforms in Croatia in the past and right now. The problem is that if we join the EU, our ability to influence politics will be much lower. For instance, now if we have these sorts of occupations or strikes or protests or public campaigns, it is not really all that difficult to enter the media and to make it a big thing on the national level, because Croatia is a small country, and of course the media and also the media function quite differently than here, because we don't have, because it's this Western way of media function. This is just 20 years old, so there is not the censorship thing is not so well. It's not so.
It's not embedded in people's
It's not so embedded
for generations.
in journalism and in media in general. So if we join the EU, it will be much more difficult. If we have occupation in Croatia or strike or protest, the people in Brussels, the bureaucrats in Brussels, they will just say, "Oh, who cares?" They won't even notice it. So in this way, it's really difficult. Of course, nobody is for the national state. Of course, the fight has to be international and all the rest of the stuff that we all know. But I think it's important for us to fight on a sort of national level while still looking at the bigger picture and connecting with people from the region and with the international student movement, etc. But for us, what we can do right now, we have to fight on a national level, because it's just a reality right now.
Pragmatically, I agree with you completely. I mean, obviously, I was involved in the occupations that were going on here, and all the marches and all this, and of course, that's what we have to do now. But I'm slightly concerned by the lack of this kind of more international vision, because I think the problem is the kind of success of that kind of state model in the post-war period relied on the kind of economic benefits.
I mean, excuse me. I mean, I think this is sort of a bit of it's getting a bit irrelevant because surely if people are demanding free education, for example, I mean, to me, I think actually it's a trap to get into a discussion about who's going to pay for it.
Yeah.
Because actually, if we put some sort of demand on the capitalist class as a whole, we don't really care who pays for it. We don't care if it's the state in one particular little corner of Europe, if it's the EU, if it's some private capitalist who pays for it, if it's whatever, it's not really that's important. I mean, what's important is developing the collective strength to put forward those kind of demands. I mean, obviously, if you put forward these if you have the collective strength to make those demands, then the capitalists are going to work out some way, and assuming they're frightened enough to actually give in some way, they're going to come up with some mechanism. They're going to find the money somehow. But we're not going to give them advice about that.
No, but the reason I'm concerned about it is because then I think, well, free education for whom? Not just who's going to pay for it, but who's going to be excluded from it. For example, if you're from Congo, are you entitled to free education in Britain? I mean, how do we?
Of course, what we would do is, of course, it has to be free for everybody.
Yeah.
But of course, in Croatia, not a lot of people will learn Croatian, so it's not. I mean, it's different. It's a much more different thing than in Britain because, of course, much more people.
Simpler.
Yeah, it's simpler because we are on the
I
semi-periphery.
think a lot of people in Congo would learn Croatian if we gave
Well,
them
if they bother to learn Croatian, I say give them free education. But the thing is, what also we are doing is that what we have seen is that a lot of radicalization of the people involved and ideological consolidation actually is gained through the direct action, because first you demand free education, and then you see that for order to get free education, you have to get the money from somewhere, and then you have to make pressure for this money to be taken, for instance, from the capitalists. So, of course, I don't share the view that some kind of return of this Western Europe style of welfare state is possible. Of course, it's not possible. We see it from what mainstream politicians are saying in the media. It's not possible because of the economic conjecture right now. So it's completely different thing that it was in this golden age of capitalism from 45 to 70. But in this way, you cannot make protests or demands by saying, oh, we want socialism, or we want utopia, blah blah. It's just one demand or one kind of action, and then you radicalize it. The people are getting radicalized, and then through the fight they get the picture. They get the idea of the bigger picture. So this is, I think, what we are trying to do somehow.
The paradox is that students in Croatia are asking for something that there is a promise of entering EU will give back to Croatian people what they already had under socialism. So there is this promise of economic prosperity, but it was one of the fastest rising prosperous countries in the world. It was first Soviets under Stalin, which was mad for its own reasons, but we didn't have that kind of extreme internal violence, and still it produced growth to the extent that in the 70s, it's an example of a country that was making whatever it needed, producing, exporting vastly. So now this hegemonic bubble of neoliberalism delivering has burst because it hasn't delivered for 20 years. It hasn't delivered. It's going to deliver if we join the EU, but hang on, we already had a lot of what you're telling us we'll get by joining EU. And it's clear people are not getting it. It's clear from Ireland, from Greece, from Spain, from Portugal. Because of the crisis, it's clear people are not getting what you're going to promise us. So we already had a lot of that. Of course, it's problematic under what kind of model can you go back. You can't copy the model and go back to the old times. But our argument here is direct democracy, because we're saying, well, hang on, we have the technology and the vastly more higher educated population on general, on average. There's just a constant growth of population education and communication that we can have decision making which is completely different. We don't need the parliaments. We don't need the parliamentary working groups. We can have ad hoc working groups because the world has them in many areas of life, not in statesmanship, not in running large capitalist enterprises because they hold the monopoly. But these arguments, you can't make them here. It's simply, like you said, complexity here is so vastly larger. Britain is involved in running the world. Every single little bit of economy change in Britain changes how the economy is run in the rest of the world. vice versa. China has the same power, more power than Britain now. Actually, we're not seeing it, but it has it. If you look at the charts of the economic reports, you can see the power, not in the British media.
I was kind of wondering about, because the idea of free education seems to be focused on economic value, like it's free, we don't have to pay, but I was kind of interested when you were saying before about it doesn't matter where the money comes from. In a way, I was thinking, well, of course, given our experiences in the UK, for example, if the money comes from a private corporation, then that university programme is forced to produce students who are studying within that domain, whether it's science or the arts. And so it does have a massive constraint in terms of who's studying what and how it's taught, and everybody's constrained to that. And of course, if it was state funded, there'd be the same or equivalent constraints. There would always be constraints. Money isn't abstract in that sense. It's coming from somewhere, and it has interest, if you like. It's interested. And I guess I was just wondering about how you guys feel, I guess, about that side of defending the liberal notion of education, and what kind of compromises you feel you faced, because we in the UK faced them constantly in terms of curriculum and expectations and the ideas of what students should be prepared for in terms of becoming successful earners when they leave university and part of a society in a kind of economic sense, perhaps, moreover overriding a kind of political or moral kind of sense of being part of society. But I wondered what you felt about that idea of defending the concept of the free in that sense.
Well, free is not just free like you don't have to pay. It's also free in the sense, for instance, what we are doing right now, fighting against these two new neoliberal laws that are trying to be imposed by the government. Is also we are trying to defend science and also education being free from the market in general, because what they are trying to do now is to completely submiss everything, both the higher education and science, to the market. That is, there can practically be no kind of research if it's not somehow connected to the market or to private capital. So I think, of course, it's important. It's important not only that it's free, but what kind of education it will be. But I think that education and science that is free and accessible, it's just like the basic thing you need in order to have also quality education. Because it's not in Croatia, it's not possible to have a system, because of course of completely different economical and political situation. It's not possible to have some sort of Harvard or Yale as in the United States. And of course, even if you look at the United States, there, if you discount the Ivy League, if you see how this whole privatization of higher education, what its results there are, it's also it's not really quality high education, except of course it's quality education for those who can pay for it. But for most of the people, it's not only that they have to pay, and they have also these debts, because in the United States now the student debt is even larger than credit card debt, and the whole credit card debt. So I think we have to have free and accessible education first, and then this can be the basis of emancipatory education in general.
So do you have a set of principles that define your concept of freedom in that sense, that kind of might be, say, alternative or progressive or developmental, say, from those principles of freedom that would go with, say, I was interested because you were talking about 68 before, and this kind of non-mourning in the other book for 68, and I was just wondering about the kind of principles of freedom that one would go to work with, and whether they needed rethinking. If we're going to talk about freedom, what do we mean by it in terms of an education? Because of course education delivers whole sets of constraints every day. I mean, it's a program, you know, isn't it? However you look at it.
Well, I'm not really big on this theoretical, philosophical stuff, but I think it's also connected with trying to get to try to impose your hegemony on the idea of freedom itself, because of course freedom can mean anything. I mean, the right also uses freedom for, I don't know, free education is of course good, but for instance free market is not good. So it's not freedom is not always a good thing, because it means if you have freedom to invest or freedom to own factories, it's not a good thing, because you have to have those who don't have the factories and who will suffer because of your investing. So I think it's very difficult to speak in such broad terms. I mean, we have to fight for, I think the left has to fight for its own idea of freedom. And
I guess I just wondered in your assemblies if there were any kind of dogmatisms that you produce to kind of affect, you know, and to kind of debate those concepts. I wondered if that happened or not, or whether there was a kind of assumed notion of what that was, and then people just kind of debated other things. I mean, I guess I'm asking quite a practical question about what happened.
well, I think the debates in our assemblies were well, they're not so theoretical most of the times. It's much more. They're on a practical level. So should we send a delegate there? What should we do with, I don't know, this and this committee? Who should we assign to this? What should we do about this? Should we do this protest, or what should we do about Dean's decision? So it's not so the theoretical stuff. I mean, I think that as I said, this kind of this broad ideological consolidation actually goes somehow through the fight, so it's not really something that we debate on the General Assemblies.
I have a question about the rules themselves.
Yeah.
Like, we're not exactly problematic, but I was kind of wondering, I mean, so it sounds absolutely amazing, the kind of impact that your actions had on Croatian society and Croatian politics. But I was kind of sort of thinking about, you know, it seems like you're kind of locked in a dialectical sort of dance with the liberal institutions that you're trying to kind of reform. And kind of like I'm thinking of the bit in Das Kapital where Marx says, okay, you know, the workers were kind of successful in their struggles to reform the definition of the working day, and they worked less hours, but those, in turn, that kind of led to an internal reform in so like the way factories work, and all those hours became a lot more intense. People had to work harder and to produce more things in less time. And my thinking is, if you look at sort of kind of like the architecture of sort of campuses in the US mostly, after '68, they were very clearly built, new buildings and new kind of campuses were very much built with '68 in mind, to prevent the possibility of something like that happening. And I'm kind of thinking of things that I see around me now in UK sort of education. There are more and more courses that are kind of remote courses, like the University of the Arts just proposed a whole series of courses now for art students and other kind of disciplines where they're kind of like either hot desk, you can sort of come, you don't really have a place to be, or you simply communicate via email. There are also loads of kind of what's called low residency MA program in the world, where people just meet like maybe twice a year, not even, so like, you know, you do tutorials or lectures on Skype and you email your tutor. And I'm kind of thinking that the rules that you propose very much rely on old notion of kind of a public space for politics, the one that I guess, you know, Negri and the autonomists want to rethink. And I was wondering if we can sort of start thinking about rules to kind of counterpose the new sort of developments. Because neoliberalism doesn't just mean privatization, commodification. It also means the breaking down of the public, of the student body in this case, into individuals, isolated individuals, and I was wondering if there was any kind of discussion or sort of actions.
Well, I think this, of course, is a big problem which you see in, I don't know, today's working class not being the same as the working class of the past, where you had big factories and there was thousands of people working in the same place. It was much easier to organize. Now you have, I don't know, translators who all work in precarious positions, and they were working individually at their homes, and of course how to organize them, it's of course a big problem. In Croatia, and it's interesting what you say about universities trying to do that also for the students, we still don't have that sort of a problem in Croatia, but what we have really seen, that what you said about public spaces, it really means a lot. We have seen that in a very, very, very materialistic, vulgar way during our occupations. For instance, one of the things that was really important for the organization of the whole movement and the occupations in our faculty was the thing that we had very simple students' cafe at the faculty, which was which was completely under student control, and their students could meet and discuss things. This was very important. And of course, what they did, for instance, in another town, Zadar in Croatia, is that they closed this cafe like that in Zadar, because they wanted to prevent the students having any sort of public space or place where they could meet and discuss. And for instance, in another town in Croatia, in Split, students had a lot of problems because their faculty was actually not in the same place. It had like 6 different buildings throughout the town. It was also a problem of some other faculties in the capital. So what we've seen is that, for instance, for our organization, in our faculty, it was a very good thing that we had this sort of autonomous place in our faculty, and that we were all in the same place. And so I think, yeah, what you say, it's really important, and I mean, it's very difficult to find the solution. And I mean, we still don't have to deal with it, but it's very important.
Could I just ask a general question about class composition, basically?
Yeah.
I mean, what percentage of the population do go into higher education in Croatia, and what sort of people are they?
I think it's now like 80% of people
really?
who finish high school,
Really?
they go to university.
Wow, so it's much higher than here, actually.
Yeah, but the problem is that a lot of these class class selection goes on.
Is how is higher education stratified? I mean, presumably you have a few elite universities and then some not so elite ones, and then technical colleges and
Well, just to finish, this sort of class selection goes on, I think, on lower levels. So starting for instance, in primary schools, and of course, if you're in some village that doesn't have where private school or high school is not so good, then it's much more difficult to get into university. But the thing is that
80% of people don't go
who finish high school.
So you're saying a lot of people.
So
don't
it's not
finish high school.
it's yeah. So
Okay.
a lot of people who are from lower classes, they drop earlier, I think.
Okay.
And I mean, the problem is that this sort of research is not really been done how it should be in
Sounds too
Croatia.
high, way too high.
Sorry?
I can't believe the numbers.
No, from the people who finish high school.
Yeah, still.
But of course, they don't all finish.
Yeah, there is a huge
college.
expansion, like in Split,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
had 7,000-8,000 students 10 years ago, and I had 20.
Okay,
Town
yeah.
of 200,000.
Yeah,
so
so
now
how-
you have 10% of
Yeah,
population.
but
students.
we don't really have this. Of course, it's a much different situation in Croatia, because we were up till 20 years ago sort of at least nominal egalitarian system, socialist. So these kinds of very elite it's much more different than in Britain, for instance. So, well, of course, the universities in Zagreb and the capital, they're perceived as better, etc. But it's not really such a sharp.
Yeah, no, but I'm just thinking in terms of how the division between students and general population. Students are not going to be perceived as being privileged, as being some kind of spoilt elite or whatever. They're just like, they're going to be seen as just like ordinary people, doing their education.
Yeah, the general population is, I mean, of course, from what, that's just my idea of it. I think general population is actually for the students.
Yeah.
It's not, they are not perceived as some sort of elite because it's, the divisions in Croatia. It's very, of course, now during the capitalist restoration, there is this sharp development of inequality, but it's still not so. I mean, it's completely different than the situation in Britain. So we don't really have the kind of elite you have here. I mean, it's
Martin, in that sense, problem is international. So it's back to your comments in Europe about freedom. The elite is. I know the elite because I'm from Split, from Croatia, but 15 years here I've studied the LSE at Goldsmith, Queen Mary. I've seen the class that rules Croatia produced here.
Yeah.
And I know it's produced at Yale, at Stanford, at Cambridge, and also, and we've got these complete no-names who don't exist as intellectuals of any kind in Croatia. They get a degree here, at LSE, at Cambridge, also get a PhD, they become part of this or that or high society or this, and suddenly, they get a position in a party somewhere at the research level, or they run some kind of NGO and they become important. You see a spread interview in a political weekly, and now there's someone. So if the class that rules is produced outside, because this is the only way to legitimize it. There is no class certification in terms of internally, because there are no universities that produce it, or like in France, in Paris, you know exactly which number of university produces which class. No, we get them produced here.
Okay. And so
Which makes it at the same time simpler to fight, because we know exactly the, okay, you can look at the CV, right? You're not with us,
Yeah, but also that presumably means that students are, in terms of the sort of jobs that the students are going to get, they're just like fairly ordinary jobs.
The thing is that if, for instance, especially of course in humanities or social sciences, it's impossible to say that. I mean, they do make that claim in mainstream media, and the politicians, they make that claim that no, but it's for you are getting educated for your own individual good. You have a high salary, but it's crap, because if you see that somebody does 5 years of studies for 5 years, and then he works for very little money in a public school, it's not really. I mean, you cannot really defend that position.
Only technical universities and some technical universities have a definite and drastic income rise in whether you're high school or you're a degree holder. That's definite. So
But in other things, it's not except for, I don't know, except for information sciences or computers, something like that. It's not. It's if you have a college degree, your paycheck is higher, but it's not so.
Yeah, of course you're going to earn more if you've got a degree. Otherwise, people wouldn't bother. But I mean, but it's not. But the point is, the sort of degree that you get, the sort of job you get, is not going to be a very privileged one.
But that's the same here. I mean, really, it's a kind of pyramid
becoming more
scheme.
and more like that.
But we operate under that myth.
Yeah, but it's literally myth. I mean, if I look at my own graduates, I see what they do. They work in retail, entertainment, services.
But I think that's part of what's going on there, isn't it? Is that students are becoming more and more disillusioned with the future that's being offered to them. I think.
Maybe the difference is that the professional class here has been certified for a long time, has been privileged for a long time, and that hasn't gone down. But what we had is doctor salaries in real terms going down. So I have friends who see my left activism, and they say, well, actually you could apply this to GPs as well. We are not well off. We might be considered to be well off, but actually, my salary. Look at my salary. Then you get the number on Facebook. This is my salary. This is how many hours. These are my shifts that I do. I think that's for us in Croatia. The battle is also to inject class consciousness in a lot of what would be here very professional, high skill. A lot of lawyers don't make a lot of money in Croatia. So it's not, that the certification did happen, but it happened in a very bizarre way, where neoliberalism did not catch and bootstrap with itself a lot of high-skilled professionals, which is the failure of neoliberalism itself. And to your question of why the media attention, that was amazing. I mean, because our neoliberals are not very good. Because if they were, they would never put university occupation. Even first 2 minutes of it's like imagine Jeremy Paxman having people from a movement, not when the protests are, but kind of once a month or every second week. All the time, and then you get university professors who are on the side of the students. They also come to tell it to the prime time television all the time. So they're not very good because this is not a generation breeding that has gone on for hundreds of years, like in UK. If you read history here, for me who have read and lived both histories now, it's really, really mind-boggling how I didn't realize how much opportunity we have, because we have like capitalists who are like 10, 20 years brainwashed into what they do. Their fathers were socialists. So, we have a lot of ways to undermine them, and they're not so clever, and they can be only tiny, tiny percentage of the new elite. Is the one who made money out of nothing, is you can't talk to them. I mean, they're kind of black and white world. But the freedom question inside the movement of students, there are a lot of small branches, the Maoists, there are anarcho-syndicalists, plenty of them, there are socialists, there are communists, there are all kind of people who participate, and they'll answer your question, all of them in different ways.
But going back to the question of solidarity and class composition, you were saying you need to find a way to capture GPs in this conversation. And I was wondering what the kind of context for this neoliberal transition is in Croatia, because here, on the one hand, I can see the appeal of the direct democracy methodology in relation to students, but the cuts have affected another class which isn't spoken of as much, which is the elderly, because of the privatization of the NHS. And I think that's going to become an even bigger issue than education. But the problem is it's very difficult to get the elderly to attend, very ill people to attend plenum, to have a vote every, that's not going to happen. So how do you deal with stuff like that? Or is that just not happening in Croatia?
No, what we are trying to do is to promote the idea of, if you try to promote the idea of direct democracy, of course, what Tony also mentioned, it's 21st century now, so it's not really like it's 1936 in Barcelona or 1917 in Petrograd. Then it was much more difficult. You had to have some kind of regional Soviet in a specific village, and then you had to put a representative to Petrograd and to Moscow. Now it's much simpler because we have the internet, so what we are trying to do is to promote some sort of idea of what is, technically it's completely possible, and you have it, of course, not for the direct democracy, but for representative democracy all around the world. For instance, that is e-voting, electronic voting. You had in Estonia, for instance, you had more than 2 million people voting through the internet this year on their elections. So it's possible, and what we are trying to do is somehow to promote all of these, also this radical side of this direct democracy idea. And what Tony also said is, in Croatia, in some ways it's much simpler, because I think that, which is different from, for instance, from Western Europe, the thing is that people in Croatia are really fed up with partitocracy. They see that all the parties basically have the same economic positions, and that voting is just a sham, and that the elections is just a sham, that it's not real democracy. So in that way it's simple, and it helps a lot that our primitive calculation was done 20 or 15 years ago, and not like 200, 300 years ago as here. So it's free. Everybody knows that all the major capitalists are just thieves, and everybody says so. It's very difficult to play like you can maybe in the United States or here, that you can play the card. No, they're very competent, they're good businessmen. We all know that it's not true. If you ask anybody, he can be, I don't know, a nationalist or something. If you ask them, they all know that this is not true. So in that way, and also what Tony said about the media, that let's say this auto-censorship skills are not so high. They cannot do it the way they do it here or in the States. For instance, we had, I do a lot of TV shows and stuff like that, and I'm really radical, and they let me to the media all the time, because I say things like we have to nationalize, we have to expropriate the capitalists or stuff like that. Of course, I use a little bit of rhetorics of not sounding. For instance, I don't say capital or something like that, but it's really radical, the things I say. I think they will never let me do mainstream.
What's your euphemism for capitalists? What do you
Well,
say?
we call them tycoons.
Okay.
But I also use capitalists.
Well, do you actually use that word, tycoon?
Yeah. It's like oligarch in Russia.
Yeah.
So it's like a normal word. And for instance, we had a festival where there was Samir Amin and David Harvey and all these radical Marxist Eagleton, and they were all in the mainstream media and like in the central news, and they were saying the
Negri,
headlines.
Harvey.
And Negri, they were all in
Revolts.
mainstream media because in
Mainstream.
Croatia, it's not. Or for instance, when Chomsky comes to Croatia, he's in all the news and on national television. It's impossible in the United States. So it's much easier that way because they, as Tony said, they don't really know what they are doing. It'll still have to pass like a couple of decades because they know what kind of thing they shouldn't allow to the media.
Yeah,
So
make sure they don't make journalism school free. They'll sort that one out.
I mean, David Harvey in private discussions said to students now recently, he's been there for the second time in the last 2 years, that there's no way for him to get any sort of similar attention in the media in US or in England, the way that students or Mate, who is young assistant professor, gets in Croatia all the time. So there is this sense of they're doing their hegemonic job, not as closely as good as the Western elites have learned. So they're bad neoliberals, and we've got a chance in another 20 years.
I mean, this is a bit of a footnote. I don't want to get into a very long discussion about this. But do you think? You were going on earlier about how people don't see the state as being so problematic because they have this memory of so-called socialist Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
So, would you say that there is quite a bit of sort of Yugo nostalgia in Croatia today?
now, if
do people say, oh, things are much better under Tito or something?
people are not. It's a complicated
Yeah,
thing
it's
because
complicated.
people are not Yugo nostalgic.
Because
Nobody. A lot of Western leftists they have this. Sort of noble socialist Yugoslavia, but in former Yugoslavia it's impossible. There will never. I think there will never be a new Yugoslavia. But what you get is a lot of people are Yugo nostalgic for the social system, for the economics. For instance, even nationalists or rightists, like regular people that are really like nationalist Croatia, blah blah blah. If you ask them, a lot of them will say, no, but for the farmers it was better in Yugoslavia, for the workers it was better. So on this kind of economic level, a lot of people will be nostalgic.
Yes, the same way.
But not for Yugoslavia, but for economic situation.
That's what I meant.
And they will also not call it socialism.
Yeah. When you say Yugo nostalgic to Croatian, it's like
that's what I thought.
it's not a really good thing. They wanted to get out.
So it's not socialism nostalgic. It's nostalgic for this thing that they don't want to admit themselves they like, but now slowly they're starting to do it because of. Students brought this thing. There is this thing neoliberal. So neoliberalism is a shorthand for capitalism in Croatia. You don't need to say it because it's obvious. The neoliberal reforms did A, B, C. They crushed workers' rights, privatized this, privatized that, closed down the whole industries which were profitable in terms of state. There were state industry bringing money in, and if you do that, then obviously that's enemy. You don't need to call it. You can choose the names. We have to be very selective with which names we use, especially because of the Yugoslav heritage, because of the internal war. So there's one thing that Matt I think forgot to mention is that these announcements that they were doing the occupation were very very that spokesperson, every different spokesperson read it, and they had more than 100 different ones every day. So there's no way we pick up on someone because there's different one every day. And this language was really, really well taken care of. That it's a language that clearly speaks about class issues and political issues, but not in the way you're used to. It's not something that any average lefty would immediately say, yes, that's our language. It's very well crafted, almost like they developed a craft of.
And you have to. What I did was in the beginnings when I started to appear in the media, I said tycoon instead of capitalist, I said neoliberal instead of capitalism. But as things progress, you can speak more freely. So now, now it's not so. A couple of years ago, it was not really possible to speak of capitalism because it's like what many of the people are saying. Well, this is not real capitalism, blah blah blah. But now, even there, like capitalism and capitalists, it's becoming a more usual term because. With what Tommy said, it was a really problem because, for instance, the word worker was problematic in the 90s because it was associated with this
Socialism.
with real socialism.
In
But now it's
first.
now
Yes.
with the crisis, it's again now it's a normal. For instance, in this our Direct Democratic Teacher Union, we use the word academic worker right now, and it's we're trying to put it back to
Use it again.
use it again and to make our own hegemony in this very
There's a battle
symbolic
for
way.
language which
It's a
goes
battle for
word
language,
for
yeah.
word, literally, and it
Yeah,
lasts.
yeah.
Sometimes you win in big steps, and for example, capitalism used to be always for generations. We had this NGO. I mean, for us, NGOs were really problematic because they brought capitalism. They were the ones saying, "Oh, socialism wasn't that good." Soros funded them and all that. At the same time, because of internal corruption and kind of slightly fascist system at the times as well in both Croatia and Serbia, we were welcoming those liberal NGOs because at the time when you have elements of fascism, of course, liberals, they're not fascists, so it's good, it's better. but now when the situation is that the right wing has cleansed itself of fascist elements, not to a large extent because they still have this outburst of their internal fascism, but they cleansed itself, enough to get accepted to EU, at least to move step by step by step. It's possible today to say that capitalism is not just a Croatian corrupt version of it, which was completely predominant for 20 years. People say, no, capitalism is fine, it's just we have a bad version. We had that all the time. I mean, I had it in interviews all the time to repeat, no, I live in UK, I've lived long now in UK. It's not, that's it. It doesn't get any better. I had to tell people, look, students, I did my sociology at Goldsmiths as well. I said, no, look, because, 9 out of 10 people who started doing work, they work on Sainsbury across the road. They just cross the cross and they go to Sainsbury's and they come and they work 3-4 days a week. And some of them are middle class as well, and very few parents can afford to give them £10,000 or 15 years, so they don't have to work. So all of these, we have to fight long to even get this notion in people's heads that capitalism, maybe there isn't a good version of it. And we would have to say, okay, there are 5 countries, and people never get in their heads that capitalism is also Africa, Asia, Latin America. So what about these? They always went, what about Sweden? They would all want to be Sweden. Or they all want to be Finland, but only for 10 years of Finnish life, because already so they're good in Finland. They're having problems. Because of Nokia has gone down, I work for them.
So in relation to the...
No, go on. And Ireland also, the crisis helped us immensely because we could make it, we translated, every single text from Guattari or from some, lefty press in, monthly reviews, a lot of them are Ireland, Greece, we translate all the time. Translation has been immense with the student movement. There is we have Google tables, Excel spreadsheets with translation, with names coming in, who's translation, who's doing the copy editing, when it's going to be published. It's a big mini factory of translations, and it helped you say, okay, capitalism is nice, we want EU. Well, do you want Portugal or Greece or Ireland or Spain? Which version of the crisis you want? And they said, no, we want Finland or Sweden. Well, no. Yes, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I was interested. It's a little bit backtracking, but I think it's very related, and for me it's really important to understand what is the role of the tycoons in the education system in general. And I mention this because in the whole Latin American debate, there was this free education thing came out in the late 80s and in the middle of the 90s. And there was a really interesting debate because of the class, because of the privatization of education, actually, if you were 70% of the population was absolutely excluded from higher education. Not only from high school, but from university. So basically free university meant subsidizing the high middle class. It was the elite only. And that created a whole really interesting discussion in Brazil and in Argentina. Whereas in Chile, there's no possibility at all of getting into higher education if you're, lower middle class because of the privatization of the public school system that just completely screwed it up.
I think the difference is from what I know. I don't know Latin America well enough, but we just spent 2 weeks in Buenos Aires with leftist friends, and it's what I know is what I've seen. Especially, it was very educational being there for 2 weeks. No amount of books can help you. I don't think that Latin America ever had this protracted period like we had in East Europe for decades of literally bringing illiterate peasants. You're talking about 90% illiteracy in Russia or in Yugoslavia, in 46 or in 1918.
My grandfather had
elementary school.
Elementaries,
my grandmother had 2 classes of elementary school.
My grandparents were peasants, and I have a PhD.
Well, for us it's simple. We were all peasants. I mean, I had one grandfather who was an engineer 50 years ago. That was a huge thing. You know, that was a bourgeois part of bourgeois. But I mean, we were all peasants. We were all, and then you had 40 years of strong state ideology saying more education equals better, equals progress for all. Simple. And when you have 40 years of that, and that does really deliver. You know, the fact that in the 70s Yugoslavia produces cars, submarines, you know, has its own industry that are building this Syria, Iran, Iraq, that was Libya, that was all built by Yugoslavian companies, and all large projects